Labour's inheritance tax reforms have sent shockwaves through Britain's rural heartlands, sparking outrage among farmers who say their way of life is under attack. These sweeping changes, led by Rachel Reeves, eliminate a crucial agricultural relief tied to inheritance tax. Family-run farms, many of which have been passed down through generations, now face a staggering 20% inheritance tax on estates valued at over £1 million starting in 2026. Labour claims the reforms are designed to clamp down on wealthy investors who exploit farmland for tax benefits. But the reality is far different. Farmers who live and work on their land, those who form the backbone of the UK's agricultural sector, are trapped by HMRC's gifts with reservation clause. This regulation penalises farmers who try to transfer ownership of their estates to their children while continuing to live or work on the land, effectively forcing them to choose between abandoning their livelihoods or facing enormous tax bills.
Today the tractors came to Westminster, many hundreds of them, and they were really pretty noisy with their horns. They had pretty strong signs, farmer, Starmer rather, the farmer harmer, and much else. And there were crowds of people there as well. And I have to say, it was noisy, but it was all very, very good-natured. Now, it wasn't just happening in Westminster, it was happening in other parts of the country too. I felt right from the start of this that if the Labour Party have roughly 100 members of Parliament for rural or semi-rural constituencies, and those margins by which they won are paper thin, which indeed they are, that maybe this campaign has a chance of winning, because if the farming community is able to galvanise properly, to get genuine public support behind it, and to go out repeatedly, peacefully, at least I think that, into market towns up and down the country where there are Labour MPs, I think concessions may well come, whatever the Prime Minister insists at PMQs today. So that's my debate this evening. Can the farmers win?
Nigel Farage weighs in on the latest farmer protests in London. Standing amidst the chaos of tractors and protesters in Westminster, Farage delivered a blistering critique of Labour's policies. "This is a betrayal of rural Britain on a scale we've never seen," he declared. "These farmers aren't millionaires hoarding wealth. They're hard-working families who've dedicated their lives to feeding this nation. Labour's so-called fairness is destroying them, while the ultra-wealthy exploit loopholes to escape scot-free. It's a disgrace, and it's got to stop." Farage's fiery words resonated deeply with the thousands of farmers who had gathered outside Parliament in one of the largest agricultural protests in recent memory. Organised by Save British Farming and Kent Fairness for Farmers, the demonstration saw tractors blocking streets and protesters carrying signs that read, "Save our farms" and "No tax on our legacy." The atmosphere was charged with anger, frustration, and a sense of betrayal. Tom Hughes, a third-generation farmer from Shropshire, stood among the protesters with his teenage son. "This isn't just a business," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This is our life, our legacy. My grandfather built this farm, my father kept it running, and now Labour is telling me I might lose it all to pay their taxes. They don't care about farmers. They don't care about us." The financial realities for farmers like Hughes are stark. Agriculture operates on razor-thin margins, with most farms generating annual returns of just 0.5% to 1%. Under the new rules, a 20% inheritance tax would cripple these operations, forcing many families to sell land, or even their entire farms, to cover the bill. Stuart Maggs, a tax lawyer who testified before the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, warned that these changes would lead to widespread devastation. "For farms supporting multiple generations, the impact is catastrophic," he said. "The older generation can't pass the land down without triggering massive taxes, and selling it destroys the business. These rules leave families with no good options." The emotional toll is equally devastating. Farming isn't just a livelihood for most families, it's an identity. Losing their land would mean not just financial ruin, but the erasure of a way of life that has defined rural Britain for centuries. Jane Atkins, a farmer from Kent, tearfully described her family's struggle. "This land isn't just property, it's who we are. Labour talks about fairness, but there's nothing fair about destroying generations of hard work while letting billionaires walk free." Despite the growing protests, Labour remains steadfast in its defence of the reforms. Rachel Reeves has argued that the changes are necessary to ensure fairness in the tax system. "This is about making sure everyone pays their fair share," she said earlier this week. "For too long, the wealthiest estates have been able to avoid contributing what they owe. These changes will bring balance to the system." But critics argue that Labour's definition of fairness is deeply flawed. HMRC's gifts with reservation clause makes it impossible for farmers to transfer their estates without incurring taxes unless they leave the land entirely. Meanwhile, wealthy investors who never live or work on their farmland can exploit loopholes to transfer assets to their heirs tax-free after 7 years. The disparity has left farmers feeling abandoned and betrayed. Labour's claim that only 28% of farms will be affected does little to assuage fears. Advocacy groups point out that even farms exceeding the £1 million threshold often have limited cash flow and operate on tight margins. For these families, the tax burden is unsustainable. Nigel Farage, who has emerged as a vocal supporter of the farmers' cause, has vowed to keep the pressure on Labour. "This is a battle for the soul of rural Britain," he said. "If we let these policies go unchecked, we'll lose more than just farms. We'll lose an entire way of life. The fight isn't over, and we're not backing down." The protests in Westminster are just the latest in a series of demonstrations. Last month, over 13,000 farmers marched through London, demanding that Labour reconsider its policies. Advocacy groups have ramped up their lobbying efforts, sharing personal stories of families on the brink of financial ruin in a bid to sway public opinion and force the government to take action. Tax experts have urged farmers to tread carefully, emphasising that the reforms won't take effect until 2026. Rob Goodley, a partner at Blick Rothenberg, advised farmers to consult professionals and avoid making hasty decisions. "There's still time to plan," he said, "but the uncertainty and stress this is causing are immense. It's no wonder farmers are taking to the streets." For now, Britain's farmers remain united in their determination to fight back. The stakes couldn't be higher. If these reforms proceed unchanged, they could fundamentally alter the character of rural Britain, forcing family farms to sell out to large corporations or foreign investors. The ripple effects on local economies, food production, and the countryside would be devastating. The battle for Britain's farms has only just begun. Farmers, advocacy groups, and their supporters are determined to keep up the pressure, whether through protests, lobbying, or public campaigns. They are fighting not just for their livelihoods, but for their communities, their families, and the generations yet to come. The outcome of this struggle will shape the future of rural Britain, and it's a fight they're determined not to lose.